You are on your days Amud Aleph 12a. So apparently, yesterday's recording did not capture the audio, which is too bad. I hope I fixed it now. The little mic is indicating that it's picking up audio, so I hope it's working. But anyway, yesterday we discussed the various names of Kalev, and we had, I think it was 5 descriptions. The first of his name was Yashar, that is to say that he set himself on a straight path, not to fall prey to the spies. Shoivev, which is another name, which comes from the term rebel. He, as the Rashi puts it, he riled himself up to rebel against the spies. And lastly, his name was Ardon. And Ardon, we had 2 translations to the word Ardon. One is that he chastises inclination. We discussed this at length yesterday. And that notwithstanding his external fight, he also had to deal with his internal battle and chastise his own inclination, because even as he's fighting against his peers, there's always the part of him which says, just give in. You have to fight that. The other translation to the word Ardon is that it comes from the word Vered, which means a flower. His face looked like a flower. And then elsewhere in Divrei Hayom, in the book of Chronicles, we have his name as Ashur, which means blackened, because his face is blackened from fasting. Then we had Avi, father of, in that he was like a father to his wife, taking care of her, even though she was sickly. And then finally, Tekoa, Tekoa comes from the word tekiah, to blast, shofar, that he, blasted his heart to his Father in heaven, beseeching God to give him strength not to fall for the peer pressure of the spies who came back with a negative report. Okay, now this verse that we're reading here, which is Achshor Avi Tekoa, and Ta'achshor, father of Tekoa, he had 2 wives, Chala and Nara. Chala, not as in bread, but Chala as in an aleph there, which is more like sickly. But it could be just her name on the simple reading. So we already discussed that the word Ashur actually means Kalev, and Avi Tekoa are descriptions, not that he's the father of Tekoa. And now we're going to tell us that when it says he has 2 wives, it doesn't mean he actually had 2 wives. He actually had 1 wife, which was Miriam. And these are 2 more names for Miriam, in addition to the names we discussed in the past. Says the Gemara, Hayu Shtei Nashim, he had 2 wives.
He had 2 wives. That's from
Book of Chronicles, Chronicles 1, chapter 4, verse 5. So it said that Hayu Shtei Nashim, he had 2 wives. Says the Gemara, not that he actually had 2 wives, but Nasa Miriam Gishtei Nashim. Miriam herself was like 2 wives, Chala Venara. He had 2 wives that are like Chala Venara. Like Chala Venara Havai, not that their names were Chala and Nara, but rather Ela V'tchila Chala. First she was sickly, as we discussed before. And at the end, Nara. She was like a young maiden. So we have a kind of rosier ending to this. And that even though described Miriam before, one of her names is Azuva, because everybody abandoned her because she was so sickly looking. She was as pale as curtain. But here in the end, she becomes beautiful like a young maiden later in life, which is usually... That's the Nara name.
But the Chala was also sickly?
Chala comes sickly, that's where she started out. And that's why it's not that she was actually 2 wives, not that he actually had 2 wives, but she was like 2 wives. Right. First sickly, Chala, and then later Nara, like a young maiden, which is the opposite of most people. Most people start off as a young maiden and then get old and sickly as time goes on. And here we have the reverse. She started out as sickly, and then later in life becomes beautiful like a young maiden, which is interesting.
So
Well, sort of like wine, right? Wine starts off where it's harsh and it ages and
It gets
becomes
better.
better in time.
And then it goes bad again.
And then it goes bad again.
Right, so when you have,
Yeah.
when you compare a bottle of wine to a woman, it's like, yes, she gets better in age, and eventually she turns to vinegar.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Okay. Anyway, so it's just interesting. It's just interesting to note that it's the reverse of most people's experience. What did we say, Robert?
I'm just going to say that originally, earlier in the verses, it said that Azuba was sickly.
Well,
Was
Azuba
there
literally
a
means
difference between
Azuba literally
and
Azuba literally means she was abandoned.
Ah,
Because she was sickly, she was abandoned.
oh, okay.
Abandoned by all men, meaning no one wanted to be with her. So she was abandoned because of her sickliness. So it comes down to the same thing, but it's a different adjective, right?
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
The Gemara continues. Now, this verse in Chronicles, the next verse reads, or two verses later, Ubnei Chala, and the children of Chala, the sickly one. Now we know it's actually Miriam, she's called Chala because she's sickly. Her children were Saras, Soyhar, and Esnan. So the Gemara comments and says these aren't actually three children. There are just three descriptions of what happened to her. Namely, Saras, the word Saras comes from the word Suras, or I should say the reverse.
Trouble?
The word Suras in Yiddish comes from the word Saras in Hebrew. Trouble, yeah. Why? Because she became trouble for everybody else. All the other women were now jealous of how beautiful she was.
Huh.
So whereas she was abandoned before by all men, now all the women are jealous of her. Which gets to the next translation, Soyhar. Soyhar also means a luminary, like we have by the Teva. When Noah builds the ark, God tells him to put a luminary, and the verse says, Soyhar tasala Teva, make a Sohar, a luminary for the ark. So her face became luminescent. Her face was as bright as the afternoon. She became full of life, whereas before we described her as pale like a curtain. Now she's shining like the afternoon. And then finally, here's the best part. Esnan. What's the name Esnan? This is Shekala Roya Isa. Anyone who saw her, Moilech Esnan Leishtai, gave gifts to their own wives. By seeing her, they got excited, and therefore they would give gifts to their wives, hoping to engage with them. So it's quite interesting. We're just going to leave it like that with no
It's
commentary.
kind of like taking a wild horse out of the wild and bringing it home, taming it, and making it beautiful.
I suppose. I don't know if, I guess, yeah.
Cleaning
But
it
that's,
up and
yeah. It's obviously there's spiritual levels to this as well, and I'd love it. And just, especially because it's funny because the Gemara talks about description of Miriam, her different names, all of which indicate the beginning in which she was sickly. And then the Gemara goes on to describe Kalev and his internal struggles and his prayer and his fighting his own inclination and his dealing with peer pressure. And then the Gemara goes on to discuss how now Miriam is beautiful. And in the middle, the Gemara talks about how he was like a father to her and that he tended to her. So it's almost as if Kalev's internal work and helping his wife is what makes this transformation. Right?
it's
So
his transformation of his.
Exactly. So his internal, that's correct. So his internal struggles, his prayers, his internal struggles, his fighting with his own inclination and successfully doing so. And throughout this entire time, he's still tending to her, right? The verse describes her as Avi, her father, as he's tended to her, making sure she was okay. That is what eventually given the layout of the Gemara, I'm suggesting that's what probably brought about her beauty. So we talked about this before, that talked about some of the previous classes, when you see the positive in somebody else, it brings out the positive in them.
Right, when you nurture someone.
When you nurture their positivity, it brings, yeah.
Perhaps been abandoned, you see a dramatic change.
That's right. So when you nurture somebody else, it brings out the best in them. And maybe there's another element here, that when you're nurturing somebody else and bringing out the best in them, you have to do internal work as well. You can't just think, no, it's when a person comes and says, I'm good, I'm perfect, I'm going to help you. Usually the result is, stay away from me, thank you very much. But when the person being helped senses the person helping is also, fighting in life, there's much better chance of
being received well, right?
Wow.
You know, like
Yeah, the help is not coming from a perfect person, the help is coming from
someone who's
somebody who
working
also is
correct.
broken.
Like, there's the rabbis who have their arms folded and say, I'm great, I'm perfect, why aren't you guys as good as me? Nobody listens. But when people see the rabbi himself is growing in his Yiddishkeit and pushing himself and working, then that brings it out too. So in him nurturing his wife, it's not just simply nurturing her and he's in a good space. He himself is dealing with his own demons. He's fighting peer pressure. He's dealing with he's got to chastise his own evil inclination. He's got to deal with his own battles while he's inspiring and bringing out the best in her, physically and spiritually.
Coming from a place of humility rather than an arrogance.
Exactly. Rather than arrogant.
Let me help you. Make me feel
It's
better.
condescending. Yeah, exactly. It comes off as condescending. Yeah. Which is another thing. It's a little bit off topic, but it happens where people get this idea of marrying to save their spouse. Like if I marry her, I can fix her up, or if I marry him, I can fix him up. Mistake. You get married to be on the same page and grow together. Not one spouse is enabling the other or fixing the other or anything like that. We're in this together and we're growing together. And that's what we're seeing here. Even as he's tending to her, he's also tending to his own internal struggle, dealing with the spies, praying to God that he doesn't fall for the spies, chastising his evil inclination that he doesn't fall for the spies. So there's that element as well, I think. Okay. So this basically concludes the Gemara's discussion on Kalev and Miriam, which is really a sidebar because the Gemara began with Miriam as a midwife, and in reward for being a midwife and not killing the Jewish babies and Pharaoh's instruction, she merits to be the ancestor of King David. And she is the ancestor of King David, based on a verse that she's married to Kalev, referring to her as Ephrat, and King David, his lineage being Ephrati, coming from Ephrat. So having raised this idea that Miriam is married to Kalev, we went through this whole little thing about Kalev's different names and Miriam's different names and their relationship. Now the Gemara goes back to the narrative of the bondage in Egypt and the commentary on that story. So the Gemara really actually is going through the verses. It started off with the beginning of slavery. We started way back with the new Pharaoh, or the Pharaoh that acted as if he didn't know Joseph, and then the Pharaoh convincing the people to come along with his plan, right? And then the slow progression to slavery, increasing, first making them volunteer, and then servitude, the whole business there. And then we got to now the decree of Pharaoh telling the midwives to kill the babies, them refusing. This is all still in chapter 1 of the book of Exodus. And then the last verse in chapter 1 of the book of Exodus reads as follows. After the verse describes that Shifra and Puah refused Pharaoh's instruction to kill the babies by saying that the women give birth before we get there, but in reality they were actually hiding the babies and raising them, right? Then the verse reads, okay, so he gave up on the midwives, so now he instructs his own people to take care of business because the Jewish midwives aren't listening. And that's what the verse reads in the end of chapter 1 in the book of Exodus. And now the Gemara quotes. Vayit is a little number 4 there, or Daled. Vayitza pare l'chol amai, and Pharaoh commanded to all his people, saying, as the verse goes on to say, the Gemara doesn't quote this part of the verse, but the verse goes on to read, all males should be thrown into the Nile, and all daughters shall be made to live. So on the surface, you might have read the verse to mean that he commands his people, as in his people should implement this law. But you could also read that he commands to his people, as in the law applies to them too, is that even the Egyptians had to kill their own baby boys, not just the Jews. That's the Gemara comments here. Rabbi son of Hanina says, Af al amai gazar, he even decreed upon his own people that they kill their own sons. As Rashi tells us from the famous Medrash, I believe it's Rashi quotes it in Chumash as well, that Pharaoh's stargazers saw that there was going to be a son born, a male born that would lead the Jewish people out of Egypt. And the stargazers could not determine whether this was going to be a Jewish boy or an Egyptian boy. And Pharaoh in his paranoia said, kill them all, including his own people. The Medrash is there more elaborate. Sorry?
This could be the measure for the 10th plague.
The measure for measure, 10th plague, the firstborn. Yeah. Yeah. There's also the element of water. He throws them into the Nile and they get drowned in water at the sea. Right? The Medrash actually goes on to say more, if I remember correctly, that they also saw that this leader of the Jewish people would get stricken by water. So they figured throw him into the Nile that he should die. But in reality, what they were seeing was Moshe Rabbeinu getting punished for hitting the rock to get the water out rather than talking to the rock for getting out. So there is an issue with water there. Although the Gemara mentioned earlier that they went with water because they figured God promised he would never destroy the world again with water. Remember that?
Yeah.
That's what the Gemara said earlier. Okay. So the Gemara now says like this. Okay, so now having taken this all into consideration then, says, comments the Gemara. Amram Rabbi Chanina further says, there was 3 stages to this. Shalach Gzedes Gazar. 3 stages to this decree. Betchila first, in Benhu, first he instructed the midwives. In Benhu, if it's a male, Amitan Oisa kill him. Ulbasayv, and then afterwards, he instructs his guards, his servants, to throw all the boys into the Nile. And at the end, Amar Gazar, he also instructed that even his own people be thrown into the Nile. Now, even though in the reading of the verse, the order is actually different. The verse actually has throwing them into the Nile after the statement that he instructs his people, as in that he... Right, the verse reads, he commanded his people, saying, all males be thrown into the river, which means the command to the people come before thrown into the river. But the Gemara is switching it around and saying, first he told them to throw the babies into the river, as he told his guards to do that, and then later he added that even my own people will get that, even the Egyptians will get that punishment. So the Gemara is kind of switching the order of the verse to give it a progressively worse decree. Okay. Now, the next verse is chapter 2 in the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. And there it begins to describe Amram and Yocheved, who he is from the tribe of Levi and she is from the tribe of Levi. And they had a son, and they saw that the son was beautiful. And the story goes on to describe Moshe being saved in the basket, and then Batya taking him and raising him, right? I'm looking at the verses here. Oops, what just happened? Yeah. First, they tried to hide him for 3 months, and they couldn't continue hiding him, so they put him in a basket and put him into the river, and so on. And Miriam is watching from afar. The whole story unfolds. So the verse reads this. This is how the verse describes Amram and Miriam's relationship. Vayelech ish mi beis Levi, and a man from the household of Levi went, and he took for himself a daughter of Levi. So the Gemara asks, Vayelech, he went, where did he go? Like, where was he? The verse doesn't describe where he went and where he was coming from. It just says Vayelech, and the man went. So the Gemara asks, Lahechon halach, where did he go? So Amar Rabbi Huda bar Zvina, Huda son of Zvina says, Shahalach batzas pitoi. Not that he physically went somewhere, but he went along with the advice of his daughter, Miriam. What's the advice his daughter gave him? So Tana the Gemara says, quoting a Mishnaic age text, Amram, the father of Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, whose name was Amram, Gadol Hador Haya. He was the leader of the Jewish people. He's a great one. Everybody followed his lead. He was the Rebbe of the time. And Kivin Shira, considering that he saw, Amar Parai, the Parai Harasha, the wicked one, said, that all males must be thrown into the Nile. Amar, he said, we are trying to have children for no reason. They're going to die. So what's the point? Why would we bring children into the world if we know they're going to be thrown into the Nile? So Amar, he decided to divorce his wife. He divorced Yocheved. So Amdu Kulan, so everybody else following the lead of the great Rebbe, Amram, Amdu Kulan Vegirshoy, they also went ahead and divorced their wives. Esther Shasay and their wives. Amr like Bitai. So Miriam said to Amram, Abba, dear father, Kasha Gzeirascha Yaisim Mishal Parai, your decree is worse than Pharaoh's decree. Shaparai Lagazer Elas Chorim. Pharaoh only instructed to kill the males. You, by getting divorced, are denying both males and females. So you're worse. Furthermore, Paray legazer ela b'olam haza. Paray only instructed that they die in this world. But you, b'olam haza u'lo'olam haba. You are denying these in the souls, both physical world, because you're not being born, because you're divorced, plus the world to come. Which is interesting.
Interesting, souls up there that are in the bodies don't get to go to
Ah, that's exactly what's interesting, which means a soul, just by the very fact that it came into this world, even if it lives for a very short period of time, goes to a level that it didn't have before.
What does that mean? That it goes to a level that.
Miriam is telling her father, by you not bringing children into this world, you're denying them both the physical world and the next world. And
Okay.
Robert's asking, well, weren't they not in the spiritual world before they were born? So what exactly are they missing out by not coming down here? So I'm suggesting that if that's the case, you must conclude that a soul comes down to the world, even if it's living for a very short period of time. Say those males that were thrown into the Nile back in Egypt. They went up to a level in heaven that they did not have before, just by the very fact that they came into a body. It's pretty incredible. In fact, sorry?
It sounds like as we're coming from one place to this place to go to another place. We're not going back to the place we came from, is what it sounds like.
It's going to a higher level, a deeper level.
A different,
Look, truth and God is infinite, so it goes deeper and deeper. Not that it's a different location, it's just deeper, I imagine.
No, but it's not like we came out of the water onto land and we're going back into the water.
Go
We
to-
came out of the water onto land and now we're going
To a deeper water.
to a different,
I don't know if it's a difference, it's deeper.
but what it sounds like.
So I'm suggesting it's deeper. I don't think it's different. I'll add even more. And maybe this is what the Gemara means as well. Olam haba, in this context, doesn't necessarily mean heaven, but it actually means the era of the resurrection and Mashiach's coming. That's what it could mean. Because they came into a body, they get that. They're part of the resurrection now, because they were living. And I'll say even more. The Gemara tells us elsewhere that Mashiach comes. Ein ben Davidova achi echalia. What's the? Kol neshama shebaguf. I can't remember the exact language, but the language is basically that there is a great spiritual body of souls in heaven, and Mashiach comes when all those souls are born. So with every soul that comes down to the world, even if it lives for a very short period of time, contributes to Mashiach coming, and therefore Mashiach comes, that soul is part of it too. So by not bringing these children into the world, Miriam is telling her father, you're denying these souls the opportunity to be part of the Messianic process, and denying the opportunity to be part of the process, and therefore to come back when it happens. And that's perhaps what's happening here. Not just the world to come after they die, but the world to come as in the Messianic era.
No. We start with one soul, which is split into two. And then from there, it becomes, we are fragments of that one.
So the language of Gemara is a great spiritual body. So we share, like, it's got to give it like DNA, spiritual DNA that breaks down into a bunch of different subcategories, but all share the same root core.
Right.
So that's the point. There's one giant spiritual soul. We're all just a little part of it. And every part of it must come down to this world in order for Mashiach to come. And thus she's telling her father, you're denying these souls the opportunity to be part of this process. Bring them into the world. If they died, then that's not your business, that's God's business.
Right.
Which gets to the next point, she says. She says, Pare Rasha, Pare, the wicked one. She continues to her father. First of all, you're making it worse because you're denying both males and females. Number two, you're denying these souls the opportunity to be part of the world to come. Number three, Pare Rasha, Pare, the wicked one. He's a wicked person. So Suffolk Maskayemes, it's doubtful whether his decree will actually be upheld. Maskayemes Gzeres, so whether his decree will be upheld. Suffolk Ein Maskayemes, perhaps it won't be fulfilled. But Ata, you Amram, dear father, says Miriam, Tzaddik, you are righteous. And Bavadeh Shegzeros Maskayemes. Certainly, your decree will be upheld. So if you decide to not have children, then that's going to be a fact. Pharaoh decides to kill. If God lets him kill, he'll kill. If God doesn't let him kill, he won't kill. That's not your business. But you're a tzaddik and you decide something, that has its effect. Shenemar, as the verse reads, Atigzer Omer, This is a verse in Iyov. Tigzar Omer, and the decree is spoken, the Yakum Lach, and it is fulfilled. So
other people following or in his own?
Both. He's setting the precedent that people shouldn't have children. So that's what's going to happen because you're the tzaddik. But for the wicked Pharaoh, maybe it won't happen. So hearing this, so Amram got up, and remarried his wife. All the Jewish people following Amram's lead, they all got up, and remarried their wives. And this is the meaning of the Gemara. So that's the case. The Gemara asks, so the verse reads, and the man from the house of Levi went. And we just understood that what does the word went means? It means he went along with his daughter's advice. And the verse goes on to say, and he took for himself a woman from the house of Levi. The Gemara asks, Vayikach, he took for himself a woman from the house of Levi. It should have said he returned to his wife. Why does the verse say he took her? As if like it's first time. It should say he returned to her. So says the Gemara, Amr Rabbi Zina says, he returned to her as he would have, as if it was the first time he married her, with all the pomp. He put her in a aparion. I think an aparion is like one of those chairs you carry on people's shoulders, parading them. I think that's what it is. So he put her in this aparion, the Aaron and Miriam and their first two children, Aaron and Miriam, dancing in front of them. Amram, and the angels of heaven said, Aim habonim semecha, the mother of children rejoices. Yes, that's the story. God willing, tomorrow we'll get into discussion on Yocheved's age when she was born, but in the middle of traveling down to Egypt. We'll get into all of that, God willing, tomorrow. Quite fascinating.
Yeah.
Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Too.